Meditation does in 15 minutes what prayer couldn't do in years. You have knelt and asked again. You have prayed the same prayer so many times, the words wore smooth like a stone kept too long in a pocket. And some quiet part of you has wondered why the answer never seemed to arrive on time. There is an old word in the book of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 8, and it reads like this: "This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success." Notice what it does not say. It does not say pray about it once and wait. It says meditate in it day and night, and only after the meditating comes the prospering and the good success. E.W. Kenyon would stop a room right there and say, "Do you see it? The promise was never being withheld from you. You were withholding yourself from the promise. Because asking is what the senses do when they are afraid, but meditating is what the Spirit does when it already knows. You can pray sincerely for years and still be speaking sense knowledge to God about a problem, instead of speaking revelation knowledge to yourself about what has already been settled. And that difference, small as it sounds, is the whole reason meditation can finish in 15 minutes what years of asking never touched. So before we go further, let us plant something true in you, in your own words, in the present tense. Say it with me. I meditate on the word until it becomes part of me. I speak what I meditate until it takes root in my heart. I let it work in me instead of only asking for it. The word is alive in me. Again, I meditate on the word until it becomes part of me. I speak what I meditate until it takes root in my heart. I let it work in me instead of only asking for it. The word is alive in me. And if you want tomorrow's teaching to find you the same way this one just did, stay close and subscribe, so the next word is already waiting before you go looking for it. Now, if something in you just went quiet while you heard that, type the words "I'm ready" in the comments. Just those 2 words. Let them be your seal on what we're about to walk through. The first law is this: prayer and meditation are not the same motion, and mistaking one for the other is why so many years get spent asking for what could already have been received. Kenyon taught that there are 2 kinds of knowledge at work in a believer: sense knowledge, which is everything learned through the eyes and ears and circumstances, and revelation knowledge, which is what the Word reveals about what already belongs to you. Prayer, as most people practice it, stays down in sense knowledge. It lists the problem, it describes the lack, it asks a distant God to intervene in a situation that looks a certain way. Meditation does something else entirely. It takes a settled truth from the Word and turns it over, and over and over, in the mind and in the mouth, until the truth becomes more real than the problem ever was. Picture a man who has prayed for provision for 3 years. Every night the same request: "Lord, please supply my need." And every night he lies down still seeing the empty account in his mind. Because nothing in that prayer ever replaced the image of lack with an image of supply. Now picture him spending 15 minutes instead turning over "My God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory," saying it, chewing it, letting it become the picture in his mind instead of the empty account. It is not that his prayer failed, it is that it never left sense knowledge. Think also of a courtroom, a person standing outside the courthouse for years, pleading through the doors for a verdict already recorded inside, while the paperwork granting them everything they asked for has been sitting signed and sealed on a desk the whole time. Prayer, left alone, is the pleading at the doors. Meditation is the walking inside to read what was already decided. Or think of a gardener who waters the same bare patch of soil every day, asking it to become a tree, when the seed itself was never planted. The water was never the missing thing. The seed was. Meditation is the planting. Prayer alone is only the watering, and water without a seed can fall for years and still leave the ground bare. This is why two people can pray with equal sincerity, and one changes quickly while the other does not. It is rarely about how hard either one believed. It is about whether one of them also took the settled word and worked it into their own thinking until it stopped sounding like a wish and started sounding like a fact. That shift, from describing lack to meditating supply, from pleading at a locked door to walking through an open one, is the whole hinge this teaching turns on. My word working in me is greater than my need working against me. The second law is this. Meditation was never meant to be a blank mind. It was meant to be a full mouth. The old Hebrew word behind meditate is hagah, and it carries the picture of a low muttering, a chewing, the way a cow brings up its cud and works it over slowly, and slowly again, until every bit of nourishment has been drawn out of what could have been swallowed whole and wasted. Notice the diagram beside these words. One animal chewing patiently under a steady gold light, and one quick empty gulp that takes in nothing and holds nothing. That gulp is what most prayer becomes when it is only spoken once and left. A fast swallow of words with no chewing behind them. Kenyon taught that the words a person keeps repeating to themselves, quietly, privately, become the actual material their inner life is built from, brick by brick, day by day. So if for years your private mutter under your breath has been small defeated lines, like it never works out for me, or I suppose I will just keep struggling through this again, then technically you have already been meditating this whole time, just on the wrong material, chewing the wrong cud. You did not need to add meditation into a life that had none. You needed to notice the meditation already running underneath everything and change what it was quietly feeding on. It is not that you lack discipline. It is that your discipline has been aimed the wrong direction for a long time without your permission. This is precisely why 15 minutes of deliberately chewing on one true promise can outrun years of scattered prayer, because prayer often happens for a few sincere minutes, and then the mind wanders straight back to its old mutter for the other 23 hours and 45 minutes of the day. But meditation is the discipline of catching that mutter mid-sentence and slowly retraining it on purpose. Picture a man stuck in traffic every evening, and for years his quiet under-the-breath line has been, "Here we go again. Nothing ever moves for me," and he has said it so many times it drives itself now, without him even choosing it. Now picture him instead. Same traffic, same red lights. Quietly chewing on "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Saying it low, unhurried, letting it sit in his mouth the way the cow lets the cud sit. 3 minutes, then 5, then the whole drive. Nothing outside the car has changed yet, but something inside the car has. And that something is what meditation was always for. Picture also someone brushing their teeth each morning while quietly repeating, "I am strong in the Lord and in the power of his might." Small, ordinary, barely 2 minutes, but repeated daily, it becomes the low hum underneath everything else they do that day. That hum is meditation, and it keeps working, even while you are not consciously watching it work. The mouth that used to gulp down fear without chewing it can just as easily be trained to chew on promise instead, and once it learns that new chewing, it rarely wants the old empty gulp back. I choose what I chew. The third law is this. Prayer often treats a promise like something you are still trying to obtain, while meditation treats a promise like something you already legally own but have not yet taken vital possession of. Kenyon made a careful distinction here. He taught that redemption gave the believer a legal standing the moment it was finished, but that legal standing has to become a vital, felt, walked-out reality through the inner work of the Word. That is the gap between the legal and the vital, and it is exactly the gap prayer alone cannot close, because prayer, by itself, keeps treating the inheritance as future, still asking for what redemption already recorded as present. Imagine a young woman whose grandmother left her a house. The deed has her name on it. The papers are filed. It is legally hers the day the will is read. But if she never goes to see it, never turns the key, never walks its rooms, she can still live for years in a cramped apartment complaining about how tight her life feels. The house was never the problem. Her lack of possession was. It is not that the inheritance was too small. It is that it was never walked into. Now stretch that same picture a little further, because this is where the difference between praying and meditating becomes impossible to miss. Suppose every night she kneels in that cramped apartment and prays, "Please let me have a bigger place someday." Sincere words, real longing, and yet the deed sits untouched in a drawer the whole time. She is petitioning for a future house while already holding the paper to one. That is what unaided prayer so often does. It asks heaven for what heaven already signed over. Meditation is the very different act of taking that deed out of the drawer, unfolding it, reading the address slowly, picturing the rooms, until the house stops being a rumor and starts being a place she can already describe from memory. She has not gained anything new by doing this. She has simply stopped living smaller than what was already hers. And this is precisely what Kenyon meant when he said revelation knowledge must be meditated until it becomes real experience. The facts of redemption do not change when you meditate on them. You change, your grip on them changes, your sense of what belongs to you changes. Think of it this way too. A legal possession left unclaimed can sit quietly for a lifetime and never once interrupt the poverty of the person who owns it. But a vital possession, once taken, starts furnishing the rooms of your actual daily life almost immediately. That is why 15 minutes spent meditating on "healed by His stripes" can move faster than years spent praying, "Please heal me." The 15 minutes are not creating healing from nothing. They are walking the sick man into a house that was deeded to him the day the price was paid. And once he is standing in that house, instead of describing it from the yard, his whole posture changes, his breathing changes, the way he talks about his body changes. None of that came from a longer prayer. It came from finally taking vital hold of what was legally already his. So hear this plainly. You are not waiting on God to sign anything new. The signature is old. The seal is already pressed into the wax. The only remaining question is whether you will keep standing outside describing the house you own, or go in. Meditation is simply the walking in. What is legally mine, I now make vital. Before we keep going, if you want a simple way to build this daily habit of walking your own rooms instead of only asking at the door, there is something called the daily practice, made for exactly this: a few focused minutes each morning to meditate the way we are describing here. More on that near the end. Now let us continue. The fourth law is this, and it is the deepest hinge in Kenyon's teaching. So let us take it slowly, in pieces. First, consider the mind. Second, consider the mouth. Third, consider the life. Fourth, consider how the three finally lock together into a single motion, because meditation moves through all four of these, while prayer alone, left by itself, often only brushes the first and stops there. First, the mind. Kenyon taught that whatever image dominates your thinking eventually dominates your experience, not because thinking is magic, but because a mind is not neutral ground. It is fertile ground, and it grows whatever seed gets planted in it most often. Prayer that only describes a problem keeps feeding the mind a picture of that problem, night after night, the same scene replayed with fresh detail each time, and a mind fed lack learns, slowly and quietly, to expect lack the way a field learns to expect whatever crop keeps getting planted in it. Meditation interrupts that feeding on purpose. It takes one specific promise, holds it steady in the center of attention, and simply refuses to let the old picture back onto the screen for those few minutes. That alone changes something real, because a mind cannot hold two dominant pictures at once with equal weight. So whichever picture you keep returning to, deliberately, patiently, eventually wins the space. It is not that the old picture is stronger, it is only older, and meditation is what finally outlasts it. Second, the mouth. This is where Kenyon's teaching becomes almost uncomfortably practical, because he taught that confession, the words a person speaks over their own life, always agree with one of two things, either the word or the circumstance, and the tongue, given enough repetition, tends to build whichever one it keeps agreeing with. Prayer that only pleads keeps the mouth living in the language of asking, "Please, if it be your will, if there is any way at all," and there is nothing wrong with that language. But it was never meant to be the only language. Meditation moves the mouth somewhere else entirely, into the language of already possessing, "I am healed. I am provided for. I am the righteousness of God in Christ." And it is not about finding magic syllables to recite. It is about retraining a mouth that has spent years describing the appearance of things to instead describe the truth of things, because a mouth that only ever narrates the appearance will, without meaning to, help keep that appearance exactly where it is. Third, the life, and here is where 15 minutes finally begins to outrun years. Because a life is not built by good intentions, it is built the same slow way a habit is built, by repetition, and only by repetition. You cannot want your way into a renewed inner man any more than you can want your way into playing an instrument. You have to repeat your way there, and meditation, done daily, is simply repetition aimed at truth instead of repetition aimed at fear. Picture two people living this out side by side. One has prayed sincerely every single day for 5 years. "Please let my marriage heal." An honest prayer, a tired prayer, but every day right after praying it, they climb into the car and spend the whole drive to work replaying last night's argument, word for word, tone for tone. So technically they are meditating too, just on the wound instead of on the promise. The other person prays once, briefly, honestly, and then sets aside 15 minutes to meditate on love, suffers long and is kind, speaking it slowly over their own heart, picturing what it would look like lived out in their own kitchen, their own evenings, letting it become the actual mental furniture of the morning instead of an afterthought. Within one season, not 5 years, one season, their whole posture inside that home has visibly shifted, not because their prayer grew longer or louder, but because their meditation was finally doing the repetition their prayer alone never got around to doing. Fourth, consider how these three finally lock together, because the mind, the mouth, and the life were never three separate rooms. They are one motion seen from 3 angles. The mind holds the picture, the mouth speaks the picture into agreement, and the life, over time, simply becomes whatever the mind and mouth kept agreeing on together. This is why a person can attend church faithfully, pray sincerely, and still privately live under years of the very thing they keep asking God to remove. It is not hypocrisy. It is simply that the asking never reached down into the mind's picture or the mouth's daily agreement. Meditation is the only motion that reaches all three at once, and that is exactly why Kenyon insisted that revelation knowledge has to be acted on to become real. Meditation is that acting, quiet, internal, unseen by anyone else in the room, but it is genuine action, not passive waiting with folded hands. It is the disciplined turning of mind and mouth and daily life toward what redemption already finished, long before you ever felt it. So when someone says meditation did in 15 minutes, what prayer could not do in years. Understand what is actually being said. It is not that prayer failed, it is that prayer alone, without this fuller work of mind and mouth and repeated life, was only ever carrying half the load. I repeat, truth, until it becomes my life. And before we move to the fifth law, I want to ask you gently to subscribe. So tomorrow's teaching finds you the same way this one did. Staying close costs you nothing, and it means the next word will already be waiting when you need it. The fifth law is this: prayer, left to itself, tends to repeat the problem to God, while meditation repeats the promise to yourself. And those are two entirely different directions of speech. One faces outward toward heaven, describing a storm. The other faces inward toward your own heart, describing a settled truth. Both have their place, but only one of them retrains you. Picture a woman who has said for 6 years, "Lord, you know how hard this is for me." True, honest, sincere, and yet 6 years later, she can recite the hardship in more detail than she can recite a single promise. She can tell you the exact words the doctor used, the exact tone of her husband's voice, the exact shade of gray the room turned that afternoon. But ask her for one promise from the words spoken with that same detail, and she goes quiet. Because that is what she rehearsed. That is what got the 15 minutes. Not on purpose, just by default. It is not that her prayer was wrong. It is that it was never joined to meditation. So the storm kept getting described in high definition, while the promise stayed a blur. Meditation flips the direction of the rehearsal. It says fewer words to heaven and more words to your own soul, not because heaven was not listening, but because your own soul was the one still arguing with what heaven had already settled, and your own soul, it turns out, was the audience that needed convincing all along. So tonight, instead of only telling God how hard it is, try telling your own heart what is already true, out loud, in the mirror if you have to, and notice which direction actually changes the room you are standing in. I speak to my heart, not only about my need. The sixth law is this. Kenyon often spoke of what he called the hidden man of the heart, the real inner spiritual self that Scripture describes as being renewed day by day, even while the outer man perishes and the outer life still looks the same. Prayer, as it is commonly practiced, mostly petitions circumstances to change. Please let the doctor's report be different. Please let the money arrive. Please let the marriage soften. And there is nothing wrong with any of that asking, but it stops at the circumstance. It never reaches the hidden man underneath the circumstance. Meditation works the other direction entirely. It goes past the visible situation and speaks directly to the inner self that Scripture calls the hidden man. And a renewed hidden man eventually reorganizes the circumstances around it, not by force, not by shouting the problem down, but the quiet way a strong root reshapes even packed and stubborn soil over time. You do not see the root working, you only notice, months later, that the ground itself has shifted. Think for a moment about what it means that this inner man is called hidden. It is not on display. No one applauds it. No one else can see whether it is being fed truth or fear on any given day, which is exactly why so many people neglect it for years without ever noticing. They tend carefully to the outer man, the calendar, the appearance, the performance at work, and they leave the hidden man to feed on whatever drifts through unattended, worry, comparison, old wounds replayed on a loop, and then they wonder why years of sincere prayer over the outer circumstances never seemed to touch the weight they carried underneath. It is not that God was withholding renewal, it is that the hidden man was never once being deliberately fed the very word that renews. Let us walk one ordinary day so you can feel exactly how this works. 6 in the morning. She wakes already anxious about a diagnosis. If she prays a quick, tired prayer, Lord, please let the results be good, and goes straight to her phone. The hidden man receives nothing that day, nothing at all. 7:30, commute, mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. And understand, this is meditation too, just unintentional, aimed at fear instead of truth, feeding the hidden man dread whether she meant to or not, because the hidden man does not care whether the feeding was on purpose. It simply absorbs whatever gets repeated most. Noon, a rushed sandwich at her desk, still replay. The seventh law is this, and it is the deepest one we will walk through together. So let us take it slowly, in pieces. First, consider identification. Second, consider authority. Third, consider why time itself seems to compress. Fourth, consider the years that were not wasted after all. Look again at the tree in the picture beside these words. Roots made of light reaching down into old soil. A trunk plainly marked identity. Branches lifting up into open sky. That tree did not grow its roots by begging the sky for branches. It grew branches because the roots were already settled deep in ground that was never in question. This whole law lives inside that picture. First, identification. Kenyon's central teaching was not merely that God would help you. It was that in redemption, you were joined to Christ so completely that his finished work became your legal and spiritual position, not something separate from you that you must beg access to. Prayer that only asks for help treats Christ's finished work as a resource out there somewhere, still distant, still waiting to be granted. Meditation on who you are in him is what actually brings that identification down into felt, functioning reality. When you meditate on, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. You are not reciting a nice sentence. You are rehearsing your actual legal position until your inner sense of self catches up to what redemption already declared true the moment it was finished. It is not that a new fact is being created, it is that an old fact is finally being agreed with. That is why this can move faster than prayer. Prayer asks God to do something new. Meditation simply agrees, finally, with something already done. Think of a man named the kind of man who spent 15 years believing he was, deep down, a failure. Not because Scripture ever said so, but because that was the sense knowledge his early years handed him. Every prayer he prayed carried a quiet undertone of, please make me into something better than I am, and God heard the sincerity. But the prayer itself kept reinforcing the very identity it was trying to escape. Then he began meditating, slowly, daily, on I am a new creature, old things are passed away. At first the words felt foreign, almost dishonest, because they did not match how he felt, but he kept chewing them anyway, the way you keep working a stiff joint until it loosens. And within a handful of weeks, something shifted. Not his circumstances yet, his sense of who he was underneath the circumstances. He began to catch himself making small decisions the old identity never would have made. Speaking up once in a meeting, forgiving a debt he had held onto for years. And none of that came from a new prayer. It came from an old fact he had finally agreed with. Notice, too, what he did not do. He did not wait for the feeling of newness to arrive before he called himself new. He called himself new while the old feeling was still knocking at the door. And that is the exact hinge identification turns on. Sense knowledge waits to feel it first. Revelation knowledge declares it first and lets the feeling catch up later. Most people have that order backward their whole lives without ever noticing, praying for a feeling to arrive so they can finally believe the fact, when the fact was always meant to come first and produce the feeling as its fruit. Second, authority. Kenyon taught plainly that the believer was given real authority, not merely the right to request, but the right to act in the name that was above every name, prayer. when it stays only in the language of request, unintentionally hands that authority back across the table. Please do this for me, as if it still waited on the other side, as if the door were still locked and someone else held the only key. Meditation, because it is spoken in the present tense, as fact rather than as request, begins to exercise the authority instead of only referencing it. This is why a person can pray about anxiety for years and still feel powerless in the middle of it, and then, meditating daily on, I have not been given a spirit of fear, but of power, and of love, and of a sound mind, feel the very structure of the anxious thought lose its grip within weeks. Not because new words were more magical, but because the words finally matched the authority that had been theirs the entire time. Picture two believers standing at the same locked gate. One keeps knocking and asking someone unseen to please open it. The other reaches into their own pocket, finds the key that was there all along, and simply turns it. Both believe the gate can open, but only one of them is acting from the authority they already carry. Meditation is the discipline of reaching into that pocket instead of only knocking. It is the quiet daily rehearsal of I already have what it takes to walk through this, until the hand stops hesitating and simply turns the key. Think also of a young manager handed real authority over a small team on her very first day. The paperwork is signed, her name is on the door, and yet for the first 2 months, she still asks a senior colleague for permission before making decisions that were already hers alone to make. Nothing legally changes when she finally stops asking permission. The authority was granted the day she signed. What changes is that she finally starts acting like the person the paperwork already said she was. That is authority waiting on identification, and it is exactly what meditation supplies when prayer alone kept asking permission for a decision already granted. Third, why time itself seems to compress. Here is the part worth sitting with. Prayer measures its progress by whether the outer circumstance has changed yet, and outer circumstances, being made of many moving parts, other people, timing, seasons beyond your control, often take a long season to shift, no matter how sincerely you ask. Meditation measures its ground differently. It measures whether the inner man has come into agreement with the Word, and agreement can happen this afternoon. The inner man does not need years to align with truth. It needs repetition and attention. Nothing more mysterious than that. So what looks like meditation working in 15 minutes? What prayer could not do in years is really this. The inner alignment, which is the actual engine of change, can complete quickly, sometimes in a single sitting, and once the inner man is aligned, the outer life begins moving in that direction almost immediately. The way a compass needle, once released, does not take years to find north. It simply turns, whereas years of asking without that inner alignment simply produced years of asking, more knocking at the same locked gate. It is not that meditation is fast or magic. It is that it finally places cause before effect, instead of begging for effect without its cause. You cannot harvest a field you never agreed to plant, and prayer alone, without meditation, and keep a person standing at the edge of the field for years, admiring the harvest they wish for, without ever putting a single seed of agreement into the ground. Consider, too, why this compression so often surprises people. They expect transformation to cost what it has always cost them before: long seasons, slow grinding effort, and when instead a settled inward agreement arrives in an afternoon, they almost distrust it, as though ease itself were suspicious. But a locked door does not care how long you have been knocking. The moment the key turns, it opens the same instant for someone who knocked for 10 minutes as for someone who knocked for 10 years. Time was never the thing holding the door shut. The missing key was. Fourth, and this matters more than it might seem, the years spent only praying were not wasted. They were the ground being broken. Kenyon would never have told a struggling believer that their years of sincere prayer were foolish or empty. Sincerity was never the missing ingredient. Direction was. Those years taught you what you actually wanted. They wore down enough pride to make you willing to learn a new way of holding the Word. They softened ground that meditation could later plant into. So when meditation finally does in 15 minutes what all those years of prayer seemed unable to do, it is not mocking those years, it is standing on them, the way a single spark can finish what a long soaking rain began. The rain did not fail, it prepared the wood, and without that long rain, the spark would have had nothing dry enough, nothing ready enough to catch, hold that image beside the tree once more, roots reaching down into soil that took years of quiet rain to soften. A trunk-marked identity finally standing upright in ground that was ready to receive it. Branches only now free to lift toward the sky. None of it skipped a step. It simply finally moved in the right order. Pause for a moment and pick one real promise you already trust. Something small enough to hold in a single breath. Hold it there gently. Let it be the one you agree with today, instead of only asking about tomorrow. That is where we begin next. I stand on every prayer I prayed, and finish it now. The 8th law is this, and it is the most practical one of all, because none of this stays theory for long. Kenyon's approach to meditation was never mystical or complicated. It was almost embarrassingly simple, and simple is exactly why it works. Most people quietly assume that anything powerful enough to outrun years of prayer must itself be elaborate, hours long, difficult, reserved for the specially gifted, and that assumption alone has kept more people from ever beginning than any actual lack of faith ever did. So let us walk through it piece by piece so you can actually do it today. First, choose one verse, one promise, small enough to hold in a single breath, not a whole chapter, not a list of scriptures. One, because the mind cannot chew 10 things at once and truly digest any of them. A mind handed 10 promises at once tends to swallow all 10 whole and taste none of them. Second, speak it slowly. Out loud if you can, in the first person, present tense, not someday I will be healed, but by his stripes I am healed now. Not someday I will have peace, but the peace of God which passes understanding guards my heart and mind. Now, the tense matters more than people realize. Someday keeps the promise forever. Future now brings it into the room with you. Third, after you speak it, sit quietly for a moment and let a picture form. What does it look like for this to already be true in your body, your home, your work? Do not force the picture. Just let it rise the way a face comes to mind when you think of someone you love. Fourth, say it again, slower this time, and let the picture settle a little deeper. That is the whole method. No incense, no special posture, no candle, no retreat to a mountain. Just 15 honest minutes and a promise you actually believe belongs to you. Morning is often the best time for this, not because other times fail, but because whatever dominates the first few minutes of your attention tends to set the tone underneath the whole day that follows. Whatever gets fed first tends to lead, but any consistent time will outwork an inconsistent hour. Better to keep the same 15 minutes daily than to meditate for an hour once a month and call it done. A fire lit once a month cannot warm a house. A small fire tended daily can. Picture a man who tried praying for calm for 4 years, scattered, only whenever panic actually hit him, a fire alarm kind of prayer, loud in the moment and forgotten by evening, and then he started this instead. 15 minutes every morning, same chair by the window, same few verses on peace, spoken slowly, pictured gently. Nothing dramatic happened the first week or the second. He almost quit twice, but he kept the chair, kept the 15 minutes, kept the same slow repeating, and within 2 months his wife noticed it before he did. She said, You seem different in the mornings now, softer somehow. That is what 15 honest minutes daily can do that 4 scattered years of panic prayers never reached. Picture also a young man just starting his first job, terrified every Sunday night that Monday would expose him as unqualified. He tried praying about it in a rush each Sunday evening. Please let me not fail tomorrow. And Monday came the same anxious way every single time. So he tried something smaller instead. 5 minutes before bed. 1 verse. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Spoken slowly, pictured plainly. Himself walking into that office steady, instead of shaking. He almost laughed at how small it felt the first few nights. Too simple to matter. And yet weeks later he realized the Sunday dread had quietly stopped arriving on schedule. Not because the job got easier, but because the 15 minutes had gotten there first. Picture also a woman at her kitchen table before anyone else wakes, coffee going cold beside her, 1 small card with 1 verse written on it in her own handwriting. She reads it, speaks it, closes her eyes, pictures her actual kitchen already full of the peace the verse describes, then reads it once more before the house wakes up around her, small, quiet, unremarkable to anyone watching. And yet that is the whole engine of this law. Keep the verse small, keep the words in your own mouth, keep the picture real and near, keep the time the same each day, and let 15 minutes become the most honest appointment on your calendar. I give the word 15 honest minutes and let it work. The 9th law is this: meditation did not replace prayer, and it was never meant to shame the years you already spent praying. It simply finished what those years began. Prayer opened your heart toward heaven. Meditation is what finally let heaven's word settle down into you and take root. So if you have prayed for years and felt like nothing moved, hear this gently. You were not foolish, and you were not forgotten. You were simply missing the other half of the instruction Joshua was given so long ago. Meditate in it day and night, and then you will make your way prosperous. Think of a farmer who spends years walking his field at dusk, asking the sky for rain. Faithful every evening, never missing a single request. And the rain does come sometimes, but the ground stays hard because he never once knelt down and worked the seed into the soil. One season he changes nothing about his asking. He simply adds 15 quiet minutes each morning, kneeling in the dirt, pressing the seed in with his own hands, and within weeks, the same field that took years to yield anything begins to soften and green at the edges. The rain was never the missing piece. The working in was. This is exactly the shape of what happens between prayer and meditation. Prayer keeps lifting your face to ask. Meditation is the kneeling down that presses the answer into the actual ground of your life. So picture your own years of praying not as failure, but as the walking to the field every evening. Faithful, sincere, necessary even, and picture these 15 minutes ahead of you now as the first time you finally knelt down and worked the word into the soil of your own heart. The 15 minutes ahead of you now are not a trick or a shortcut around God. They are the completion of everything your prayers were quietly reaching for the whole time. Meditation does in 15 minutes what prayer alone could not finish in years. Not because your years were wrong, but because they were only ever half the labor. The walking was faithful, the kneeling was still owed, and it is owed no longer. Once you begin, I finish today what my years of praying prepared me for. Here is the whole picture. It is not asking that changes you. It is meditating until the word becomes yours. It is not a longer prayer that moves heaven. It is a repeated truth that moves you. It is not the years that were wasted. It is the direction that was missing. Sense knowledge describes the problem. Revelation knowledge describes what is already finished. Prayer faces outward and describes the storm. Meditation faces inward and rebuilds the one standing in it. The legal is not the vital until you walk its rooms. The mind is not renewed by intention, it is renewed by repetition. The mouth either agrees with the circumstance or agrees with the word, and every one of these 9 laws was never 9 separate ideas. It was one law, turned 9 ways. The single recognition underneath all of it is this: the word does not need years to work. It needs to be meditated on until it becomes you. And that can begin in 15 minutes starting today. If something in you is ready to build this as a daily habit instead of an occasional effort, the daily practice was made exactly for that, a short, guided daily rhythm to help you meditate the word the way we have walked through today, a few minutes each morning, plain and unhurried. It is available now for a small one-time gift of $27, fully backed by a 30-day guarantee. If it does not help you the way we have described, simply ask and receive your money back. No hard feelings. You will find the link in the description below this video, waiting for whenever you are ready. And so once more, quietly, I meditate on the word until it becomes part of me. I speak what I meditate until it takes root in my heart. I let it work in me instead of only asking for it. The word is alive in me. And that, gently and simply, is how meditation finally does, in 15 minutes, what prayer alone could not do in years. Not because prayer ever failed you, but because the word was always waiting for you to meditate it into your own life.